My name is Bob Newton. I'm the interim director of the church in the 21st Century Center, and I'm also special assistant to Father Leahy, whom most of you probably know as the president of Boston College. I'd like to welcome you tonight on this very rainy night. It's an intrepid crowd who will come out in such a storm, but come out to hear, I'm sure, what's going to be a wonderful presentation. Just to remind you, this happens to be the last event in our spring program, and the entire year was spent on the theme of grace and commitment. And in the fall semester, we focused on the vocations of the laity, and in the spring semester, and many of you, I suspect, have seen C21 Resources, which is parallels to the spring program. We focused on the vocations of religious and the ordained. And this is, as I say, our last event of the season, and we're focusing, obviously, on the topic you came to hear about tonight. Simultaneously, at another location in the Boston metropolitan area, we're co-sponsoring an event down at the Boston College Club in downtown Boston, where Dr. Thomas Groom, whom I think many of you probably know, is making a presentation to BC alumni. My task is about to end when I introduce the person who will introduce tonight's speaker. And let me introduce a person who has been involved with the Church in the 21st Century Center on our advisory committee for a number of years now, and who's also involved in campus ministry at Boston College. Sister Mary Sweeney, a sister of charity.
I want to add my warm welcome on this cold, rainy April day. I think it's a sign of your appreciation of the Church in the 21st century, the programs that have been presented, and also your interest in this subject in our presenter. Our presenter this afternoon brings an abundance of academic and professional experience. Sister Margaret Eletta Guider, M.E.G., Meg, holds degrees from the University of Illinois at Chicago in urban education and special education, a master's from Catholic Theological Union, a licentiate from Western School of Theology, at that time Western Jesuit School of Theology, and a doctorate in theology from Harvard. She has studied, researched, published, and taught on such pertinent topics as world Christianity, mission studies, contextual theologies, contemporary issues in religion, culture, and society, the Franciscan theological tradition, and consecrated life in the 21st century. Meg is the author of Daughters of Rahab, Prostitution and the Church of Liberation in Brazil, and has served as editor of Doing What Is Ours to Do, a Clarion Theology of Life. Given her interests and talents, it's not surprising to know that Meg has served as president of the American Society of Missiology and as an advisor to missionary societies and Catholic institutions. She is presently associate professor for missiology here at Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. But it's her personal experience as a woman religious that adds another dimension to her credibility in addressing this afternoon's topic. Meg is a member of the Sisters of St. Francis of Mary Immaculate and currently serves as her congregation's vice president and counselor for mission, a sign of the respect that she holds within her own Franciscan family. In addition, she has served as an advisor to other religious congregations. At this time in the history of religious congregations of women in the United States, those of us who are members have spent much time in prayer, thought, and conversation about our understanding of who we are and about our place in the church. In her article in the most recent edition of C21 Resources, Meg referred to the conviction, creativity, courage, and compassion of those who have gone before us as helpful reminders for those of us who face what she described as the trials, uncertainty, fears, and scrutinies of our own time, even as she referred to her own hope for religious life, her wish that the light she shares with other consecrated persons may shine. Meg, we look forward to your presentation, hoping that it will provide another lens for our ways of looking at those realities and for pointing out some new ways of looking toward the future. It's my pleasure to introduce Meg Guider.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that introduction, and thank you to all of you for coming out this evening. The topic entrusted to me this afternoon carries with it countless expectations from very diverse constituencies as represented in this gathering this evening. Since I like to think of myself as a person who is found worthy of trust by others, the task before me is not an easy one, for it involves far more than an objective laying out of facts and figures. As I see it, the task involves interpretation, judgment, and an openness to the possibility of being questioned, not having answers, and perhaps even being proven wrong. In any case, my presentation is less about my scholarship on religious life and more about my own conviction about the permanent validity of this form of life today and tomorrow. Taking up this task at this moment in time is a risk I am willing to take, knowing full well that every view on religious life, including my own, is a view from a point. And so from the outset, let me say that I bring to this presentation a high degree of passion, not only for the subject matter, but for the subjects who matter, namely the nuns and sisters to whom I dedicate this brief lecture, and in whose company, by God's grace, I am privileged to find myself. This presentation has 4 parts. Part 1 deals with our location, impressions of where women religious in the United States find ourselves today and how we got here. Part 2 is a brief theological reflection elicited by further thoughts on Vita Consecrata in light of the apostolic visitation. Part 3 explores a few of my hopes for tomorrow by way of questions. And finally, I conclude on a more poetic note, inasmuch as I believe that in the final analysis, efforts to characterize who we are, who we have been, and who we will be in the life of the church and the world may be best articulated through metaphor than actuarial studies. As women religious in the United States, we, like women religious throughout the world, are simultaneously informed and influenced by the modern project of renewal and reform, as well as the postmodern project of discovery, revival, rebirth, recovery, restoration, and reinvention. One might say that our collective lives can be measured not in years, but by papacies and documents. Unlike women religious in other parts of the world, most of us are also United States citizens, and to greater and lesser degrees, culturally shaped by a certain American character, which in 1831 Alexis de Tocqueville described as American exceptionalism. We are part of a very complex cultural, socio-political, economic, and religiously pluralistic country. However, as we commemorate the 150th anniversary of the beginning of the Civil War this week, we cannot escape the fact that in the first decade of the 21st century, our country is once again a nation divided, where the destructive power of recrimination and caricature rivals that of cannonballs and bullets. We are no strangers to division, to difference, and differences within difference, and our particular thisness, a quality of being described by the Franciscan theologian John Duns Scotus that relates to our uniqueness as individuals, communities, and charisms. It is precisely this hekcheitas that has engaged my imagination over the past 45 years, when as a younger teenager, I witnessed firsthand how theology, spirituality, ecclesiology, vocational identity, and passion for the gospel gave rise to visions, viewed by some as complementary, by others as competing, by still others as alternatives. Our hekcheitas, our thisness, continues to engage my imagination today. Indeed, the images that characterize us offer insights and interpretations to where we find ourselves today. The modern project is familiar to many, inasmuch as the interpretation of both its advocates and its critics have provided a backdrop to the recent apostolic visitation. As such, the modern project involved and continues to be involved in a dynamic and multifaceted movement that can be described as the evolution from classical forms of religious life into modern forms of religious life. The nuns and sisters, monastic, evangelical, and apostolic, most personally affected by the modern project are those who were professed prior to and in the immediate aftermath of the Second Vatican Council. These would include all those who have been professed for at least 43 years and who constitute the majority of women religious in the United States today. To greater and lesser degrees, these sisters have an experiential memory of the lived traditions, customs, and outward visible signs of classical forms of religious life. For some, the evolution involved modifications and adaptations of the classical form of life into a neoclassical form. For others, the evolution involved the gradual dismantling and reconstruction of some essential elements of the classical form of life and a reconstitution of post-industrial forms of religious life. As these forms began to change, so did the content of collective and individual understandings of what it meant to be a woman religious in the church and in the world of the 20th century. Informed and influenced by our own reflections and endeavors, we also were informed and influenced by the insights of our religious brothers, two whom we see here are the Venerable John Hardin and Thomas Merton. The modern project brought us to where we find ourselves today, both nationally and internationally, in U.S. church and in the world church. One manner of understanding the distinctive differences is to compare and contrast the characterization associated with two conceptual frameworks related to identity: daughters of the church and ecclesial women. These two images provided their respective commentaries on the modern project. Though the modern project takes up much space in our arena of ecclesial consciousness, it is no longer the only project informing and influencing women religious in 2011. Taking a quote from an icon of popular culture, namely Judge Judy, the time to change was yesterday. The time to wake up is now. The postmodern project is already part of our today and certainly a part of our tomorrow. Though somewhat less familiar, at least as an intellectual construct, experientially, its impact is evident in the findings and interpretations of research studies on vocations and the future of religious life. My assessment of the postmodern project reveals two streams of consciousness among relatively younger women religious, those born after 1950, and I stress relatively, and really young women religious, those born after 1975. Among many of us, at least two streams of consciousness can be observed. One stream of consciousness may be described as re-enchantment with classical forms of religious life. This can be found among young religious eager to embrace a theology of espousal and motherhood as foundational to their vocational identity. The other stream of consciousness may be described as disenchantment with the disenchantment over the modern forms of religious life. This can be found among younger religious eager to embrace a theology of discipleship and sisterhood as foundational to their vocational identity. I believe it is important to understand the distinguishing characteristics in each of these theological terms, precisely because it is theology that informs and influences the ecclesiological imagination of these women who are shaping and will continue to shape the future of religious life, not in isolation, but also in conversation with our brothers, two of whom would be Benedict Rochelle and James Martin. They are not simply recapitulating the distant and recent pasts of those who have gone before us, as those who observe in superficial ways the externals of their lived reality might conclude. Though ideologically we may position ourselves at distinct points on the horizon of consecrated life, the fact remains that whether we move in the direction of Sponsa Christi or Sequela Christi or some hybrid of the two, it is vital, if not an imperative, for our shared future, individually and collectively, and I repeat, our shared future, that we resist being drawn into the gravitational pulls of despair or presumption, and rather that we orient ourselves in accord with the compass of authentic evangelical hope. Preoccupation with flourishing or failing to flourish, since none of us can add a single hair to our heads, can easily lead us to lose sight of our original call, to participate fully in the mystery of God's self-diffusive love. Some of us will be like Sarah and Hagar, with generations to follow as numerous as the stars in the sky. Others of us will be like Naomi. But God knows what God is about. In the words of Catherine of Siena, our vocation is to set the world on fire. Stick matches, Bunsen burners, blow torches, bonfires, magnifying glasses in the sunlight, supernovas. It's all about God's self-diffusive love. Are there not as many ways as there are desires? And so now I briefly would like to turn to a theological reflection. It is said that life cycles can be measured in 60-year blocks of time. Well, if we look at 1965 as the beginning of a 60-year period, 15 years later, 1980, some of you may remember where you were in 1965, others where you were in 1980. Taking us forward to 1995, the Synod on Consecrated Life moving into the Vita Consecrata. 2010, close to where we are now. Moving on to 2025. How does one give a presentation like this without taking the long view? How do we understand tomorrow in light of 2025, not 1965? We're 3/4 of the way. In a recent rereading that I did of the post-synodal apostolic exhortation Vita Consecrata, the mystery of the transfiguration, as you know, is seen for me now in light of the apostolic visitation. The transfiguration serves as a key scriptural foundation. It highlights the experiences of particularly chosen apostles, appearances of Moses and Elijah, the manifestation of the glory or the radiance of the Lord. It focuses on ascent, the desire to cling to the glory of the Lord, admonish not to do so, a prefiguration of the Paschal mystery, and a descent into a new kind of awareness about the Missio Dei. The apostles, of course, were all men. As I pondered the scriptural foundation for the apostolic visitation, the visitation of Mary and Elizabeth took the foreground as a theological scriptural foundation. However, in rereading Vita Consecrata, I began to think of two other visitations that may provide us with some important insights into the common mission we share as participants, particularly called to participate in God's mission. I ask you to think once again about these two images. A theology of espousal and motherhood, a theology of discipleship and sisterhood. I don't mean to suggest that they are mutually exclusive. I just want us to position ourselves theologically by way of these constructs. In Vita Consecrata, paragraphs 23 and 24, there was a focus on the paschal dimension of consecrated life. So consider the testimony given constantly and with deeply admirable courage by a great number of consecrated persons, many of whom live in difficult situations, even suffering persecution and martyrdom. Last week, I received a letter from a former Jesuit student of mine. Some of you may know him, Mayemba Bienvenu. Mayemba is currently in Ivory Coast. While his letter described the horrific things that are taking place in Ivory Coast right now, his letter also took account of the profession of several Sisters of Mary of Nazareth. As I read his letter and I was preparing for this presentation, what drew my attention was how so many of our sisters and brothers throughout the world are living in the midst of this passion and death of Jesus, giving this testimony with deeply admirable courage. As two icons, not icons, but frescoes of Giotto revealed to us, in the passion and crucifixion of Jesus, two prominent figures emerge. One is Mary, the mother of Jesus, the other, Mary Magdalene. And as we look at Jesus being taken down from the cross, again, two characters come forward: Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene. So, going back to my thought here, in terms of a theological reflection, I began to think, what about the sense of mission that is at the very heart of every form of consecrated life? And are there two other visitations that we should be paying attention to, which in this post-apostolic visitation phase of our lives may have significance and meaning for us? The first that I'd like to focus on is the risen Lord as he appears to his mother. Now, we don't have any scriptural evidence for this. However, some say it was so self-evident as to be unnecessary as to include in the scriptures. However, there is abundant story in the tradition and in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius to help us grasp what this visitation, this visit of the risen Lord to his mother, meant. What it means to us as we think about it theologically and spiritually. The second has to do with the scriptural evidence as well as the apocryphal evidence. I speak here of the visitation of the risen Lord with Mary Magdalene. In both cases, there is an intensification of particularity, just as there was in the experience of the Transfiguration. It comes from the heart of God, the heart of the risen one, in both of these visitations. The movement, in a way, is an inverse of the Transfiguration as experienced by the apostles. There are no prophets, but angels, messengers. As we consider Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene, and we consider those experiences theologically and spiritually of these post-resurrection visitations, what insights do we take away as women religious today? What might we ask are the implications of living this post-resurrection moment? Not only how do we understand the vows, since not all of us take the same vows, but the vowed life. How is it that we experience consecration, being made holy in the radiance of the risen one, which impels us to mission? Which impels us to mission. And so, a word of hope for tomorrow. In this penultimate point, I will venture to go out on a limb, just a little bit, with two questions. First, who are we as women religious? Not vis-a-vis one another, but vis-a-vis our brothers and our charism-based families of origin. And who are we vis-a-vis the movimenti, the new movements, the ecclesial movements, and new communities? These are questions which we in the United States are often not touched by directly, in quite the same way as our sisters and brothers in other parts of the world. For those of you who are members of international congregations, you know what the fervor is of the charismatic movimenti. I believe these two questions challenge us significantly. though laden with some ambiguity. If you look at these questions, they require of us a new way of seeing and being in relationship with one another. It is true you can pick your friends, but not your siblings. It is not my intention here to minimize the gravity sometimes of both the challenges and the tensions experienced with LCWR, the Council of Major Superiors of Women Religious, and the Conference of Major Superiors of Men. But the Lord has given us not only sisters, but also brothers, cooperators, associates, partners in mission, with whom we share a charism and a spirituality that is foundational to our respective religious lives. But how do we perceive them? How will we perceive them? There are those in the church who say the age of the apostolic orders is over. It is now the time of the movements. Perhaps, but only if we fail to occupy space, a space that is granted to us by God's holy manner of working, not only ours. But we have to show up. So here's my question. Where will you be in August 2011? I hope a few of you will be in Madrid. And so, it's interesting that Cardinal Sunens, the same cardinal who set us on our way in 1962 with a little book called The Nun in the World, is the same cardinal who about 20 years later would be the herald and the spokesperson for the charismatic movimenti. And now, I would like to move toward somewhat of a conclusion, because it seems to me that if we really want to speak about tomorrow, we may do well to look at science fiction for some clues as to what the future may hold for women religious. I don't know how many of you here are fans of Star Trek, but there was a volume called Guises of the Mind, and it included two interesting characters, a poor Claire empath and an apostolic religious sister responsible for an orphanage. Now we know that Star Trek takes us way, way, way into the future. But to be found worthy of inclusion in such literature seems to me to be a good sign for Christianity, and a good sign for women religious. It communicates something essential about who we have been and who we are, as well as the enduring significance of what we have done and what we continue to do. Moreover, it confirms an intuition shared by many that women religious will be part of tomorrow, not only in the envisioned near future of 2025, but also in an imagined distant future as well. While I enjoy science fiction, I must admit that in recent years I have grown increasingly weary of and impatient with another kind of fiction, which has been described as sincerely held fiction, understood as those beliefs which, while sincerely held, simply are not true or only partially true. My concern is that today's women religious are finding themselves pushed and pulled by sincerely held fictions of their own creation and that of others about tomorrow as well as yesterday. Whether in serge habits or denim skirts, in wheelchairs or on Vespas, we are more than prognostications about vocations, the long-term viability of our institutes, the historical significance of our respective legacies, and our place in the life and ministry of the church. We are about the eschatological dimension of the big tomorrow, the journey into which countless numbers of our sisters are now embarking. And so, I would like to share with you a short poem. Well, it's not that short, but hopefully it'll be somewhat inspiring. Years ago, Benedictine sister wrote a piece on being oaks of justice. It was quite inspirational, and yet I thought it doesn't represent the whole picture. And so I thought that there's another dimension to this which might be expressed by olive trees of compassion, and I'd like to share that with you now. Let us be then like the olive trees, capable of growing wherever we are planted, on verdant plains and desert sands, on craggy mountainsides and the wind-stripped shorelines of salty seas. Let us grow then, taking root without taking up space. And should our branches be broken off by negligence, carelessness, disdain, or ruin, may these reckless prunings carry even more significance as symbols of peace in a broken world. And when the harvest comes, may our ripened fruits be gathered and pressed, transformed into a source of energy, an extension of our lives poured out. As the oil of gladness for the disinherited, the oil of healing for the bruised, the oil of empowerment for the vulnerable, the oil of nourishment for the hungry, the oil of protection for the naked, the oil of restoration for the worn, the oil of illumination for those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death. And let not our beauty be dimmed by the dust or the frost, the scorching sun or the pouring rain. For the beauty of our lives lively runs, whether old and gnarled or green and slender, whether knotted and intertwined or smooth and flowerful. It runs within our trunks, our roots, our branches, our leaves, our fruits. And when the day of our chopping down and demise should come, may the legacy of our compassion survive, seeping into the memory that remains, grafted onto the hearts of those who dare to say, "This is the ground made sacred by the olive trees." So let us grow then like the olive trees within this world and this church, where the prayers of millions echo in our presence as did the prayer of Jesus. The hour has come. If only this cup could pass from me, but not my will. For all those who gasp and wail and groan these words in all the Gethsemanes of today, may our very presence bear witness to the grace and peace of our compassionate God, whose holy manner of working is made manifest in those who grow as the olive trees, in those of us who grow as the olive trees. "5 years ago, the 12-year-old daughter of a lifelong friend and her husband asked me to be her confirmation sponsor. I was deeply touched by the invitation and readily responded with an enthusiastic yes. In the weeks leading up to the confirmation itself, we had occasion to dialogue about the meaning of the sacrament, its significance in the life of a soon-to-be teenager, the challenges and insights of her service project, and the saint whose name she intended to take. She was so impressed by Thérèse of Lisieux and the Carmelite tradition, even at 12 years of age. We talked about the differences and similarities between Carmelites and Franciscans. I asked her if she could imagine herself entering religious life when she was older. She turned to me and said, "I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure." I found this tentative response to be qualitatively different from a straight-out no or an unreflective yes. I took such a response as a good sign, a very good sign. For young girls and women, religious life is a life choice worth pondering today and tomorrow. Thank you.